So let's play it one more time, and I apologize for the salty language. Protesters are very salty. Let's play it one more time just to make sure everyone could see it. He's holding a gun and pointing it and spinning around. Let's play that cut one more time. So that was spread as evidence of police brutality. And Joe, I believe that you would agree that that clip itself, seeing a police officer spinning around and pointing his gun at people, looks pretty bad, right?
It does.
It looks very bad. And apparently it looked very bad to the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, as well, who said that he wanted a full investigation and he wanted all the facts to come out, but also demanded that this police officer lose his badge and gun. Let's play cut 2.
There's a video going around of a police officer in the middle of a situation that admittedly looked chaotic, but where protesters were in front of that police officer drew his gun at some point yesterday. That, to me, seeing that video was absolutely unacceptable. Now, I don't know all the circumstances, and we must know all the facts. There will be an immediate full investigation of that incident. But I can say, as a New Yorker, as your mayor, as someone who understands that the vast majority of protesters are there peacefully, and even those who do have that violent intent are still human beings, we have to always know it is not the place of an officer to pull a gun in the middle of a crowd, knowing that there are peaceful protesters in that crowd. That is unacceptable. That is dangerous. And I want you to note on that video how a superior officer immediately came over and moved that officer away from that crowd. That officer should have his gun and badge taken away today. There will be an investigation immediately to determine the larger consequences.
So that was Mayor Bill de Blasio's response, that this superior officer, in his interpretation, the superior officer moved him away, seeing that he was doing something wrong, and that it was unnecessary for him to draw his weapon against what the mayor of New York called peaceful protesters. Okay, well, let's just jump right to it. That clip
now you're going to show
edited.
me. Yeah, it was edited.
Yeah, that clip was
I saw
edited.
this morning.
That clip was edited to remove the context of why he drew his firearm. Let's play cut 3.
You need to chill, bro.
So right there, I cut it there because the guy videotaping, once that happened, got really shaky. There you can see the superior officer that Bill de Blasio congratulated for scolding the officer who pulled his weapon. That was a video of that lieutenant almost getting his skull caved in by a rioter with a brick in his hand.
Right.
I want to play it one more time because it was a quick clip. Let's play cut 3 one more time just in case you missed it.
You need to chill, bro.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
That's the context. A police officer almost had his skull caved in. If he wasn't wearing a helmet, he'd be dead right now. That was someone who came over, ran, and smacked him in the back of the head with a brick. Immediately after that, the officer from the original video drew his firearm because he had no idea what was happening.
Right.
He was caught off guard with it. It's disgusting because there are legitimate cases, Joe, and again, there's no daylight between us. There are legitimate cases of police officers who abuse their power. There
100%.
absolutely are.
100%.
But what we're seeing on social media is also an attempt to slander good police officers, slander police officers who are doing their job correctly, and to make them out to be criminals, to make them out to be murderers.
Yeah.
Right. The narrative, the old saying is that it takes a lie can get all the way around the world before the truth has a chance to put on its boots or put on its pants. And this was another case of that. That edited video went around. The mayor of New York called for this police officer's firing, and it turns out it was completely justified.
we are faced as people with the weaponization of technology. So technology and platforms, Max, are just getting weaponized at a rate where we can't keep up with that either. And you have Trump that came out that basically signed an executive order against social media platforms, right? And talking about the fact that that there has to be a fair distribution of messaging, but that's not what's happening. They're building things like this. They're building this. You want to talk about the fact checkers? The fact checkers should be taking all of this stuff down and calling it false, but it will continue to permeate all of these social media environments because to them, it fits their narrative. It fits the narrative that they want to tell to the public. They want to enrage the public. They want to keep us divided. They want to create chaos. And again, I say it over and over again, you have the 10% on both sides that marginalize the 80% in the middle, right? It's the same things that can be said for police officers. Look, I think now through George Floyd dying, I think that we are going to see an enormous amount of cover be given to good police officers to pull out and to get rid of the bad police officers. I think that they're not going to be in fear of losing their jobs anymore, that we're going to be creating an environment where good police officers can come back to the force, because a lot of good police officers leave. They work as police officers for 5, 6, 7 years and then they leave because frankly they don't want to work in an environment like that. Right? They don't want to work in an environment where there's a bunch of bad police officers and they don't have anybody they can trust because they've built an ethos or a culture of corruption. They don't want to work in that environment either. But I think what you're seeing is this is going to give them cover. And there are a lot of good police officers. Right? Look, you could talk to the minority communities, you talk to the black community, and they will tell you they have a favorite police officer. Right? They have a favorite in their community that they really, really respect and admire. Right? You can see that on countless videos. But the left and the right, the far extremes, and I'll say more the far left, right, the loony left, they don't want us to come together. They don't want any cohesion. They want the Bill de Blasio, whatever his name is.
Bill de Blasio.
Blasio. They want him to get out there and say he should be fired and this is wrong, right? Because it creates confusion. It creates confusion.
Well, how can we possibly expect good cops to weed out bad cops when good cops like this police officer who drew his weapon only after his lieutenant was struck in the head with a brick is vilified and made out to be some kind of a murderer, right? That's the challenge. And that's a challenge that we talked about yesterday. There are good police officers out there to remove the tools in their tool bag, right? To vilify them as they're trying to protect people. And it isn't just people online, Joe. You can hear in that clip, we'll play it again. You can hear in that clip that the bystanders are also accusing him of pointing his gun at peaceful protesters right after they just witnessed a police officer take a brick to his dome.
Yeah.
Let's play cut 1 again just so we can hear that. Pointing a gun at an effing crowd. That's what people were yelling at him.
Right.
So it's not just fake news online. It's also fake news in the moment in these protests. And I talked about it yesterday that this is organized. There are people who go up to the front with their hands up, making it look like they're completely innocent. The people right behind them are the ones that throw things at officers or hit this officer in the head with a brick, as an example. And then what you capture is the footage of the officer seemingly overreacting to the peaceful people, right? This is exactly what I warned about yesterday.
Optics, create optics that aren't there.
It's absolutely true. Now, I want to play this next clip because the news got a hold of this and interviewed the lieutenant who almost got his head caved in with a brick. And he described it as it felt like he was getting shot. Let's play cut 4.
More videos surfaced today of police officers under attack. We spoke today with one lieutenant who told us he was almost killed, as seen in a video that has gone viral.
This is the video we first showed you. And speaking for the first time, the lieutenant who was attacked.
It felt like I got shot. That's how hard and vicious it felt.
He says his helmet likely saved his life. And even with a concussion, Lieutenant Rodriguez stayed with his officers as he says they were surrounded by an angry crowd of about 100.
This was a riot, and we were fighting for our lives. They were throwing rocks, bottles, vacuum cleaners. They threw a moped at us.
And then the brick. The video seconds later shows a fellow officer pulling out his gun. The mayor called for that officer's gun and badge.
That is unacceptable. That is dangerous.
Union leaders say the mayor wrongly rushed to judgment.
Of course he
We got
did.
you the video, the full video, and that shows that a person came out of that crowd within a foot and tried to kill a New York City police lieutenant.
Other videos surfacing of officers under attack. This from Fordham Road in the Bronx, suspected looters seen beating an officer. Or this, a cop on Madison Avenue down on the pavement after trying to confront vandals. Or this, looters run over a sergeant as they make their escape. And in all the looting this week, and the governor blaming the mayor and the NYPD.
Police did not do their job.
Oh my gosh.
With hundreds of arrests being made, the mayor tried to push back against reporters who described a city in chaos.
There is no such thing as being able to loot with impunity. I am so sick of these efforts to mischaracterize realities.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so he's sick and tired of people trying to characterize the reality.
Yeah.
And yet the very police officers who are trying to stop the rioting and the looting are literally being beaten up, left for dead in the street. One of those videos showed them being run over. It's, yes, that's why people are angry at the New York City mayor, Bill de Blasio. Not just for the fact that his daughter was arrested for participating in an unlawful riot. I mean, they call it a protest, but it becomes a riot at that point, that she participated in that. Not just the fact that she's helping lead those efforts, right? That's a whole other story. But now when we actually have video of a police officer being forced to not deploy deadly force, but just to brandish his weapon after another officer is attacked, he calls for their badge. And again, there's other videos of Bill de Blasio blaming the police department, right? The governor of New York blamed de Blasio. De Blasio blamed the police department. And here these officers are saying, wait a minute, we're told to stand down, and when we actually do get attacked and we're forced to defend ourselves, you accuse us of being the instigators. It's a no-win scenario, and this
It's
is
backwards,
why...
Max. It's backward. The whole thing's backwards. It's backwards. You act like an idiot. We're going to let you out of jail. I mean, there's absolutely zero common sense or logic that we're dealing with here. Zero.
Yeah. And here's an interesting part of it. New York City has bail reform. New York has bail reform. So
Right.
if you're actually arrested for looting, which I believe is a third grade felony, you actually, unless you cause bodily harm to someone, if you're just breaking in and stealing stuff, you are required to be released from prison, from jail, immediately after you are arraigned. So when looters and rioters are arrested one night and they're arraigned the following morning, they are out of jail and ready to loot and riot again the following night because of bail reform policies put into place by Democrats in New York. That it's unjust to hold rioters and looters for longer than a night. You have to release them. I mean, that's what New York PD is up against. They're arresting these people, and they're out the very next night doing the same thing. It's literally catch and release. It's absolutely incredible. But this illustrates the bigger issue. Yes, we have people in police departments who are the bad apples. And the other part of that saying, Joe, that doesn't always get repeated is bad apples will ruin the bunch, right? It's not just that there's a few bad apples. If you leave them in place, they will ruin the bunch.
Right.
So you have to get the bad apples out. But we cannot, it's impossible to do that cleansing when the country's on fire. You have to put out the fire first before you can even talk about that, because as we're seeing from Bill de Blasio, he's trying to have that conversation now. Oh, I see a video of a cop pulling a gun. He must be bad apple. Pull him out. When he's actually the guy defending the lieutenant that just got his helmet caved in. You can't rush to judgment. We can have the conversation. We need to have the conversation. But when you have that conversation now and you rush to judgment, you end up crucifying. I mean, that guy was labeled like a murderer. You keep doing that, eventually there's going to be vigilante justice that's delivered on these people, and it's completely unnecessary. So we have to put out the fire. And once the fires are put out, yes, we have to talk about the bad apples in police departments. We have to talk about use of force guidelines, and we have to weed these people out. But this whole fake news story shows that when you try to do that now, when we're also relying on these same police officers to keep us all safe, mistakes are made. Whether that, I mean, the original video was deliberately edited. They deliberately kept out the part of the police officer being smacked in the head with a brick, right? That's true. But other people were so quick to judgment that they literally branded this guy as a murderer or as some kind of criminal when he was just trying to protect himself and his colleagues. It's incredible. Usually you don't see fake news get revealed this quickly, but this is one of the fastest cases I've ever seen.
Well, and it's the fake news is, you know, I'm sitting here reading about this particular video, and by the way, the mayor has not backtracked on his comments yet. You realize that, right?
No, yeah.
He hasn't corrected himself. He hasn't said, "Hey, under further consideration of what we watched, you know, it was probably a acceptable reaction when you're surrounded by 100 people and you're facing severe amounts of violence." This is they are sanctioning violence against people. And you've seen it online. People have used Martin Luther King's words to say that Martin Luther King himself advocated for violence. He never advocated for violence.
No.
So it's like reading the Old Testament and saying that now it justifies the ability to beat to death someone for being gay, right? I mean,
or for eating shellfish.
Or eating shellfish, yeah. So
yeah.
But what we're facing right now is it's unprecedented times where we are literally letting an agenda. We are letting a group of people that have control over the things that we use in order to gather information. They have polluted our ability to get real information. They polluted our ability to hear factual truth. We can't see it, right? Because on one side, any truth that doesn't fit their agenda, they fact check it and say, oh, that's partially false because technically this one minute detail is not true, right?
Yeah.
And then they don't use any sort of factual basis to dispute it. They don't use any facts. They don't use any sources. They just say, you know, I called this person or I did this thing, right? Or I checked into it and what you're saying is not true. So if it doesn't fit their agenda, they take it off. So they have weaponized technology. They have weaponized our media. They have weaponized our communities against us, right? They are propagating education environments like the universities, and we're paying for it. Like we're paying for teachers to become advocates and to put these loony policies that take away our ability to create any sort of moral, ethical guidelines in our kids' lives. Yeah. Right? They're literally there's a war going, Max. We're in a war. This is a big deal. Like we're in a fight for our lives right now. Not tomorrow, not hey, we're headed towards there. We're in a fight for our lives. And this fake news, they had this information. They had the fact that the guy got hit by a brick when they said it. And my guess is that the mayor knew when he said it that there was probably some extenuating circumstances, but he wanted to be on the right side. He wanted to stand up, right, and act like he's on their side. They're not on anybody's side. The government and the leadership are not on anybody's side. They're on their side. They just want to mule around and act like, oh, I'm for you. No, you're not. You're not for me, right? And really, the police officers that are getting beat in the streets, they don't even have a chance. What chance do they have?
No, they don't.
They
don't at all.
Yeah, we're stacking a deck against the people in our communities. That's what we're doing, and we're allowing the Antifa and all of these extremist rioters to one thing, make legitimate protesters that have something to protest look bad, so that it divides our community, and secondarily, we're allowing them to create propaganda and use technology and this far leftist agenda in order to permeate our communities and our families. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
And there's another level to this, So we watched that clip of
Yeah.
him getting hit in the head with a brick, and the helmet saved his life. Now, the NYPD is lucky that of the tens of thousands of officers, they have enough revenue in New York City to be able to buy themselves top-notch equipment. They're very
Right.
lucky. In many cities and towns around the country, they do not have that privilege. They simply can't afford to buy brand new equipment for their officers. And as we're seeing here with these protests, it's not just in the big wealthy cities. It's also in the suburbs. We've seen, there was a couple of videos online last night of officers in suburbs, not officers, but of looters going into the suburbs and having to be chased out by people. Not every town, not every city has the funding to buy their officers top-notch equipment. As we've seen now, riots aren't really only happening where we think they're happening. They're happening all over. So a lot of these departments are reliant on the federal government for subsidized riot gear. So in order to be able to afford police shields or face shields or helmets or body armor, or even launchers to be able to shoot tear gas or smoke grenades into crowds for crowd control, or even batons, they rely on a program in the federal government called 1033. Now, this is where the federal government, when they're going to retire their equipment, instead of just destroying it, they offer it to local and state police departments for pennies on the dollar. So yes, these programs do help police departments get rifles and pistols, but the predominant amount of gear that's actually transferred is things like vehicles for SWAT teams, body armor, helmets, as I mentioned, the defensive and non-lethal and less than lethal weapons. Democrats now are trying to rush through legislation in both the House and the Senate that would suspend this 1033 program. Now, they have Republican allies like Rand Paul who want to stop the militarization of the police. And I can understand wanting to stop the militarization of the police. I can
100%.
understand the argument of
it has to stop.
I can understand the argument of why does my town need an armored personnel carrier? Even though the government gives it to the town for free, I can understand the logic behind why does my town need an armored personnel carrier? Why does my city need an armored except for the fact that we've just seen this week that they do. Right? We've seen what happens. No, Joe, we've seen police cruisers get torched. We've seen people bust into police cruisers, pull out officers, torch the police cruisers, and then steal the guns that are locked in the trunk.
Right. That happened.
So in my mind,
but that's because they were being told to stand down. They're being told to stand down. They're being told that they cannot actually, they can't defend themselves, in essence. That's in essence what they're being told.
Yes, but the problem is that the same people saying you have no need for an armored personnel carrier doesn't have weapons. It's just a vehicle that cannot be penetrated. It's called an MRAP, a mine-resistant armored personnel carrier. The military has them. When they retire, they give them basically for free. I think they're actually free. They go to police departments. The same people, the same Democrats, the same liberals saying that police departments have no need for armored vehicles are also the ones egging on the rioters and the protesters and the looters who are destroying the police officers' unarmored vehicles. So that's the challenge here. We can fight back against the militarization of the police, and I agree. In many cases, police departments have become too militarized. But
they've also become revenue. They've also become revenue points, right? So, I mean,
yes,
again, we have to. It is a separate problem.
I don't want to get too off topic.
Yeah.
It's a separate problem. We've seen literal cases of neighborhoods being saved because police had access to the 1033 program. If they didn't have those surplus riot shields, those surplus body armor, they would have been outgunned, outmatched. We see in New York police officers being beaten and left for dead in the streets. This would have happened all around the country. But these police departments were able to arm their officers, obviously with a doomsday scenario, right? You don't usually see police officers running around in riot gear. But when riots happen, you need them to have that equipment. So I just think it's so amazing that as we're seeing the heroism of police officers, the actual good officers who are saving communities, saving homes, saving businesses, saving lives, the first impulse from Democrats is to pull the plug on the program that gives them the equipment to do it. Right. If we want to talk about whether they should get full auto rifles and handguns, fine. I mean, if they don't get them from the federal government, it's not that much more expensive for them to buy an AR-15 on the market. Fine. But to say that police officers should not have riot shields, should not have surplus helmets after we just watched a helmet save a police officer's life, I don't know. It just seems so tone deaf.
I keep going back to the fact that we're dealing in a time where it's unprecedented times, right? We talk about the pandemic and some people have said that it's overblown. It is overblown. I'm going to tell you right now, it's overblown. They've created this as a political tool. Frankly, they're destroying people's lives, and more people are going to die than they died of COVID. And now that they've restated the deaths in Colorado, I'm wondering if they're going to restate the deaths in places like New York City, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
When are they going to start? When are people going to start filing here it's a CORA request, right? Colorado Open Records Act request. I wonder when they're going to start doing that in New York and other places and start validating some of these deaths, so that we can actually prove that that they've worked. This is a concerted effort to destroy our communities, right? And violate our constitutional rights.
I just can't believe that we had business owners thrown in jail for just trying to reopen their businesses, and we were told that if you protested at the Capitol, you were a domestic terrorist. That's who you were. You were a domestic terrorist. Not a single shot was fired. No one got hurt. But the very act of going outside made conservatives domestic terrorists. We did a podcast on this. That was the narrative. Hillary Clinton called peaceful protesters domestic terrorists for protesting for the right to go back to work. Now we're seeing these very same media personalities looking at riots, looking at looting, looking at police officers being beaten in the street, looking at business owners being beaten within an inch of their life and left for dead on the side of the road. Yeah. Instead of calling them domestic terrorists, the word they go to is protester. It's protester. They're not even willing to look. They're not even willing to look and see whether that's. I know, but it's just it's the bias is on full display. When a conservative even steps outside, they're called a domestic terrorist. We were accused of being murderers. Selfish murderers if we wanted to go outside because we were going to kill people's grandparents.
Well, Max, the problem is they go low. They go low,
I know,
and so we want to take the high road. I've already said the high road's over. You want to beat these leftist cowards. You want to beat them. You want to beat the loonies, the AOCs of the world. Meet them where they are. Don't. Yeah. I mean, and frankly, if we don't start meeting them where they are, they're going to continue to go low and low and low and low, and they're going to do things to basically. We're like, we just have to, turn our cheek. I'm done turning my cheek. I think there's a lot of people done turning the cheek. By the way, I didn't bring this up, but they had the protest downtown in Couch Rock. Remember, I said that there was a bunch of people there.
Yeah.
So there were people there, and you could see these Antifa guys. They were on their phones and they were texting. Because
trying to get their orders?
There were 70 or 80 people that were fully armed, right? Mm-hmm. ARs, 300 blackouts, right? That were armed on the street. And one of the guys had a sign out that says, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." And I laughed a little bit. And what the reality of it is, what he was saying is that if you try to hurt one of ours, you come to our community, try to hurt someone, right? What did I say yesterday? We're going to kick your teeth in. And frankly, that's meeting them where they are because they're cowards. If you want to beat a coward, right? And they want to do things like loot and break windows and spray paint stuff. The second you spray paint, you put that spray paint down, just one line of spray paint, and you are going to need a dentist. Actually, you're going to need more than a dentist. And you can say, "Oh, you're advocating for violence." You're damn right I am. Right? You do something to hurt my community, and we're going to meet you exactly where you are. You want to harass and intimidate? Well, all right, we'll show you what that looks like because we're not cowards. And that, Max, is what we need to do. That, if you want to win over the hearts and minds of people on the left, on the right, it doesn't matter anymore because at 80% in the middle, we're pretty much aligned with how we feel about things. It's the extremes that are actually causing us to be divided, to be engulfed in all of this chaos. Middle part, I think we're all pretty much aligned with the fact that we love our Constitution, right? We love the Second Amendment. We believe in the fact that you should have these inalienable rights. We should be able to protect those rights. But I think we've let the loonies literally dictate that 3, 4, 5, 10%. We've let them dictate for too long. It's time to actually stand up and start fighting.
Yeah, so I just noticed that our call-in number isn't on the screen today. So I want to open this up if anyone wants to call in and tell us what they want to, what they think about this. What do you think about the fake news story we went through? What do you think about the Democrats' attempts to claw back and stop police departments from getting riot gear now when it's more important than ever before? Call in, tell us what you think, toll free at 888-441-1121.
And share it, right? So if you're actually watching this, hit the share button, share it with your friends.
Yes.
The more we
hit the share button.
Yeah. The more we actually share this with the communities and we start having these conversations, the better off we're going to be. We don't understand how much support we have in our communities because we fail to talk boldly. We fail to talk in our communities about what really is bothering us and the fact that, you know, our leadership is not representative of the people and they don't serve the better interests of the people. And these bad police officers, if we can weed them out, man, we just imagine what kind of community we'd have. Imagine.
Yeah. No, we're right. But in order to do that, we have to do that with a level head. We have to do that with an actual justice approach, not fake news being spread on social media and pitchforks calling for someone to be fired when he was just defending his fellow officers. So again, please do share this stream. Facebook doesn't let us organically reach people. So if you like this, if you want more people to see this, make sure you hit the share button. It really helps us as we grow this this channel, this show. So yeah, it's just I can't believe that the first impulse from Democrats is to cut off this 1033 program, stop police from getting access to less than lethal and non-lethal and defensive equipment from the Pentagon. I can't believe how you have Democrats who jump at the slightest chance to vilify police officers, even though the video has been deceptively edited. I mean, a lot of this is par for the course, but it's happening so quickly, it's happening so fast, it's happening so much. It really does feel like it's a concerted effort, a coordinated effort to slander people. And again, not every police officer is a good officer. We've seen that. We know now there's plenty of case studies and examples to point to police officers who never should have been in uniform and do not take their oath to protect and serve seriously. But when we have officers out there putting their lives on the line, literally, we just played the clip showing a bunch of different NYPD officers being beaten up and left in the streets. When they're putting their lives on the line, we should be supporting them, not jumping to try and convict them, right? Jumping to try and prove that, oh no, that one's a racist, that one's a racist, that one's a white supremacist. It's too much. Let them protect our communities, and once the fire is put out, there will be plenty of time to talk about and to actually go through and figure out who should not wear the badge. Well, I want to show you this video too, because this
I'm done talking about the fake news. This is not going to be a 1 hour section talking about the fake news.
This this next video, it's this might be construed as police brutality, but I think it was completely justified. This is what happens when a Karen shows up to a riot. Let's go to cut 5. I enjoy that way too much. Let's play that one more time. I don't want to glorify violence. This isn't glorifying violence. This is just laughing at karma. Any Karens listening, anyone whose first instinct is to ask for the anyone whose first instinct is to ask for the manager, you probably shouldn't be in a riot. Let's just call it what it is. That was what happens when a Karen tries to shake her finger at an officer. And you know what did it in that clip, Joe? That was what happened. It was the fact that she took that second step.
Right.
She took one step towards him, shook his finger at him, and then took a second step, and that second step is what authorized him to use his pepper spray. It's absolutely, I think it's hilarious. I don't know. Some people might say that that's police brutality. Other people might say that they got what they deserved. So who knows? But talk a little bit more about that Colorado, not counter protest, but defensive posture yesterday, because we've been seeing in Castle Rock, we've been seeing that around the country too. We've as we hear the organizers behind these riots threatening to come to the suburbs, we're seeing the suburbs not necessarily saying come and bring it, and though in many cases they are. We're seeing communities starting to put out people at the edge of their neighborhoods, especially if they're very close to the city. There was one case in Washington State where the community put out Jeeps and then they were standing guard. Talk a little bit about that yesterday, because that's not necessarily getting a lot of media coverage.
Yeah, so because it was peaceful, most of the people were peaceful, but you know the reason why you had so many people that lined up on the streets to protect the businesses and to make sure it stayed peaceful is because of what Antifa said, right? You had the Antifa USA Twitter account that came out and said, hey, we're going to take it to the suburbs and take back what's ours, right? Or take what's ours.
Yeah.
Right? And with the burning emoji, right? And so the people in the community are like, oh, well, this is not going to end well for you because, you know, you come try to take something out of my house and you're going to get shot, right?
Yeah.
And but there was a concern that we need to separate the protesters because, look, protesting police corruption has to happen. I mean, if we did it more, if we actually had organized protests that at school boards and county commissioners and judges, and we held people accountable in our communities, if we did that, we would have a whole lot less bad people in government, right? And our government would be smaller because it wouldn't need to be big, right? But people were concerned. They were concerned that you were going to have this Antifa, you know, this movement of rioters that show up, professional rioters that show up to create opportunities in chaos where they can loot and steal from hardworking Americans. And you know, so that show of force was pretty amazing actually to see that many people come out in their communities. And you know, there was HOAs in the Castle Rock area that planted people with AR-15s at the beginning of their communities. You have people that stayed home. You have gun stores that now are putting someone inside of the gun stores at night and are telling the public on Facebook and everywhere else, we're just telling you right now that if you try to break in, we literally are going to shoot you trying to break in. So
that happened. That happened in Philadelphia. I think it happened at least in one other gun store. There's a report of it. Another gun store held someone at gunpoint that they caught breaking into the store. As I mentioned yesterday, my HOA, we're kind of far away from the downtown of San Antonio, but even we are bouncing around ideas on Nextdoor about what to do if God forbid the violence were to spread to the suburbs, because that's what they're promising. And this kind of brings a whole new perspective to the Democrat plan to basically export low-income housing to the suburbs. Right. Now, not every person who lives in low-income housing are rioters, are looters. Understandable. No one's suggesting that. But considering the fact that when these riots first started in Minneapolis, the first big building to be burned to the ground was a low-income housing complex under construction.
Right.
You can now understand why people who live in the suburbs, people who live in rural areas, are so reticent to just open up their communities and say, oh yeah, let's just add 1,000 units of low-income housing. Because that's been a Democrat goal for many, many years, to basically add racial diversity to suburbs and suburban areas and rural areas by bringing in low-income housing, resettling inner city residents into these suburbs. So this is kind of, and for years, the left has said, what are you, racist? You don't want to let low-income housing, you don't want black people to live near you? That's never been what it was about at all. When you bring people in like that without any logic behind it, you just say, okay, you live in the inner city, now you live in the suburbs, you're going to bring violence with you.
Right.
So for years, people have been called racist and saying, "Oh, you're just not in my backyard" kind of person. But we're seeing now that those fears were absolutely justified. And any Democrat politician, after what we're seeing the last week, any Democrat politician who tries to export low-income housing to the suburbs, I hope that people who live in the suburbs fight back, because we're seeing right now the consequences of what would potentially happen, what could happen if that's done unchecked, simply to try and diversify suburbs. Diversity for diversity's sake, it's chaos, right? It makes no sense. So that's another dynamic to all of this, because I know that in Colorado specifically, they've been trying to do that.
Well, there's another thing. You know, Josh just sent me something. He said, "Hey, by the way, who's planting all the bricks at these protests?"
Yeah.
You saw that, right?
Yeah.
Pallets of bricks were delivered to downtown Denver. Did you know that? We literally
not
had,
just Denver, every major city.
but pallets of bricks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about that. People are dropping pallets of bricks downtown.
Yeah.
Who does that?
Yeah.
Who does that?
Yeah. And,
Who?
and
I
now
want
we're
to be able to
starting see them
track.
show up in the suburbs too.
Yeah, you bring a brick down my road and see what happens to you, right? You know what splunking is,
Yeah.
Max?
Yes. Yes. It's
Am I allowed to say that out loud?
No.
All
It's
right.
yeah. There's the videos all online of places and cities that the protesters are marching. They turn a corner, and all of a sudden there's literally a pallet of bricks, and there's no construction cones. There's no active construction. I think it was in Dallas where protesters found a pallet of bricks just dropped right in front of the Justice Center, the actual like the courthouse, where they dropped the bricks there. And to their credit, the protesters are getting wise to this. They don't want this happening either. Like, the legitimate peaceful protesters are the ones posting the videos on social media saying, "Oh, you got to do better than this. You got to do better than this than to just drop a pallet of bricks in our protest route. You got to do better than this." So both sides of the aisle, the right and the left, are wise to what's happening. There's some groups out there that are deliberately delivering bricks to protest routes in the hopes that people will use them, as we showed in the beginning, to bash a police officer's head in. How much do you want to bet that one of those bricks, that brick that person used, you can
Was
probably
delivered.
trace that back
Yeah,
to
it
one of
was
those
delivered.
pallets that was delivered?
But there has to be a way to use the 500,000 million, whatever it is, cameras that they have to trace it back to who dropped those bricks and then go back to them.
Oh, and they're doing it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that is something that has to happen. If somebody bought a bunch of bricks and came to you as a business and said, "Hey, by the way, I want you to drop these bricks at 5th and Market."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that if you are dumb enough to drop those bricks at 5th and Market, that you should face charges. You should be charged with that. Because now you're inciting. You're actually building a riot, right?
Yeah. No, it's I cannot imagine how anyone could possibly, because these are being delivered by actual landscaping companies. That's who's delivering these bricks. So for them just to drop them in front of government buildings without any verification that the government actually ordered them, it's going to be tough, because the deliveries are actually from legitimate companies. You're going to have to try and figure out who paid them to deliver it.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. As a business, if you're dumb enough to drop bricks in the middle of a protest environment like this, you knew what you were doing. You cannot claim that you did not know that there was protests going on.
You can claim it. You can claim you're an idiot. Whether or not that passes the smell test or not is a different story. But I don't believe that the drivers necessarily are in on it. Because I've met people who basically just do drop-offs like this. You tell them where to drop it off, they drop it off. Like, I ordered dirt once and they dropped it off in my driveway before even ringing my doorbell. Right? They just had the address, they dropped it. So it is very common for that to happen. But it's absolutely clear that some people out there are doing this, because bricks don't just start showing up in inner cities, and now they're showing up in suburbs too, where HOAs and towns are like, we didn't order any bricks, and all of a sudden pallets of bricks are showing up on the outskirts of neighborhoods. It's very obvious what they're trying to do. And luckily, you have on the right and the left who are watching this, who are identifying it and trying to fight back against it. That's the good news, because both sides realize that it's a setup. And as you mentioned, getting both sides to work together, that's the best way to defeat this. Any final words as we wrap up?
No, just operate with courage, right? And just understand that you don't have to give up your moral character. You don't have to give up your ethical character to fight against this low, loony just agenda that it's being created. You don't. You just have to stand with courage. And if somebody throws a brick at you, you don't have to walk away, right?
Yeah.
You don't. That's not in the book. Is to walk away. You don't get to loot and do. And frankly, if somebody comes into your home, just make sure that you're well protected.
And make sure that you know the laws of your state and of your towns and your cities. As we saw in Minnesota, a jewelry store owner defended himself in his place of business and shot and killed someone who was trying to break and loot his business. And under Minnesota law, he is not protected. You do not have stand your ground in your business in Minnesota. You have a duty to retreat. In your house in that state, you would be able to stand your ground, but not in a place of business. So make sure that you read through your state's laws. The last thing anyone wants is to think that they're in the right, and some bit of their state law or local law would have prohibited them from defending themselves.
Duty to retreat.
That's what's crazy. That's
they
actually in
need
the law.
new legislators. They need new laws in their states. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's going to be it for this edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. You can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts as well as the Google Play Store, whether you have an iPhone or an Android phone. You can also find us on the Podbean app as well as conservative-daily.com/podcast. Do download the podcast. Do subscribe. Do comment. Let us know what you think. It really helps as we try and grow the podcast. So again, my name is Max McGuire.
And this is Joe Otto.
And remember that the fight to take back our country isn't over, but the only way we win is if we all stand and fight together.